What's up guys, Andrew Baina here, and on today's video we are going to be checking out the Spark by Positive Grid. This is a 40 watt desktop amp with a ton of cool mobile features which we'll get into very soon. But first, as always, I want to show you guys how this amp sounds in a full demo mix. So for this demo, I'm using my Baritone Jazzmaster guitar kit, which is tuned to drop E. So that is E, B, E, A, D, G. Pretty weird tuning, but don't worry, when we switch over to doing the tone test, I'll use a little bit more normal of a guitar for you guys. And the song that I'm playing is called Harm by Humanity's Last Breath. I'm just playing the first little part of that song. And all the guitar tones that you're about to hear were done using the Spark amp going direct into my computer via USB. So with that all being said, this is how the Spark sounds in a full demo mix. Okay, so that was a full demo mix of the Spark. Now let's talk about the specs of what is included in this guy. So first and foremost, it is of course a 40 watt guitar amp. It weighs about 11 pounds. It's pretty small, as you can see here. You can kind of see behind it, there is a 15 watt Rev G20, and it's like just a tiny bit bigger than that, even though this is 15 watts and this is 40. So pretty small form factor. It has a control panel on the top, of course, which has the standard guitar amp controls, which are, master volume, bass, treble, gain, mid, the usual stuff. In addition to that, it also has a tap tempo or a tuner if you hold the tap tempo button. It also has 4 programmable preset buttons, so you can cycle through 4 presets that you decide to choose from your phone, which we'll go into very soon. In addition to that, it also has 3 dials to control 3 of the Stompbox pedals, which are mod, delay, and reverb. And last but not least, it also, of course, has a dial on the far left where you can choose which amp model you want to use, whether you want clean, acoustic, metal, high gain, or anything like that. That is all available within the actual hardware that you can physically twist and touch if you so please. In addition to all of that, there is, of course, on the back a USB out, Bluetooth connectivity, and an aux input if you choose not to use Bluetooth, which I would recommend depending on what you're using the app for, because Bluetooth can introduce a little bit of lag. So if you want a lag-free experience, you still have the option to go aux in. Just wanted to point that out. So that pretty much covers the actual hardware of the amp, but where things start to get really interesting with the Spark is, of course, the included Spark app that you can use on your phone or tablet. Okay, so now that we talked about all the specs of the hardware, let's go into the Spark app. Like I said earlier, this is where things start to get really interesting. So this is pretty much where you're actually gonna wanna do most of your tone shaping, because you get a bunch of features on this app that aren't necessarily easily accessible on the actual dials on the top of the amp. So as you can see on the main page here, this is essentially where you're going to see your tone settings. So this is the tone that I was using for my main gent rhythm tone. I called it Does It, obviously. Also, I switched to my Aricides because it's not in drop E. It's a tuning that is more likely most people are going to be, well, it's still pretty low in drop G sharp, but it's a little more normal than drop E, let's say. But anyways, moving on to the Spark app. Like I said, this is my main tone. It's called Does It. You can see on the main page, this is where you have your amp and all of your amp settings. For my tone, I was using something called the Switch Axe, which is apparently based off of the Hughes and Kettner Switchblade. And you can see that I also have a noise gate at the beginning of my chain, which has the threshold all the way up, decay all the way down. Pretty typical gent tone settings. If you ever want to change the settings on any of these dials, it's incredibly easy. You just click and hold, and you can drag it to your heart's content to wherever you need it to be. Next up in my chain, I have a compression pedal, which just gives me a little more compression on my notes so that they all sound a little bit more consistent. Next up is, of course, a drive pedal, which is clearly based off of an Ibanez Tube Screamer. Again, pretty standard gent settings here. Overdrive is at the bottom, tone and level are at full. And then, of course, like I said, we're moving on to the amp settings, which is the switch axe. And again, same thing with this. You can, of course, click and drag each knob to be wherever you want it to be. I think I had it around 6 or so. Yeah, and that's pretty much it in terms of how you would shape your tone. Of course, you can also change out pretty much any of these pedals or amps to be different things. So in my case, I was using the switch axe, but if I want to double click the amp, a new window pops up where I can scroll through all the available amp options that you can see here. So let's say I wanted to switch over to something that sounds a little bit more like an EVH 5150. We're gonna go over to 19 Insane because that looks pretty 5150-ish to me. So if we just switch over to that amp, it's gonna retain all of my settings. It's only gonna switch the amp model. And now it's gonna sound like this. And of course, if we want to switch back to that Hughes and Kettner type sounding amp, we could switch back to the switch axe and we're back to where we were. Just like that, super easy. There's tons of other options in here. Of course, there is like a Soldano type thing, SLO 100. Pretty cool sounding. Of course, there's like a British 30, which is more of like a orange, obviously. And then of course you can do the same thing if you want to switch out any of these pedals. You have a tons of other options there. So let's say I wanted to use a different type of drive instead of the Tube Screamer type thing. Let's say I just want to use a boost pedal instead, which is just a simple boost pedal, only one knob. So we can boost the pickups a little bit. No, that doesn't sound quite how I want it with this British amp. So let's switch that back to the, where was it? The switch axe. That sounded much better to me. Much better. Still could use a little bit more boost. Let's turn that up, but turn the volume down a little bit. Cool. So then the other big feature that comes with the Spark amp is of course the tone cloud. So if I want to save this tone, all I have to do is click this little button over here and click Save as New. Let's call this Switch Axe Tone Test 3. Oh, okay, that's too many characters. Switch Axe Tone T is the name. We can select what genre we want it to be under. Obviously, I don't want it to be under pop. Let's put it under metal. Click Save. And then now, if we scroll through our tones at the top, we can see all the way at the bottom under the metal section is this brand new one that I just made. And this is of course where you can find all the other, not plugins, but presets that you have saved. You can also scroll all the way to the left to see the presets that are actually in your hardware. So if you remember earlier, I was mentioning how there are 4 buttons on the top of the amp, and this is where you would change what those buttons do. So in my case, I switched it so that the first button on my amp is the Does It preset, which again was the tone that I was pretty much using the whole time during that demo. In addition to that, the app also comes with something called the Tone Cloud. So if you click the Tone Cloud button up top there, you can actually browse through pretty much all the presets that everyone has made and uploaded to the Tone Cloud. So if you want to find, let's say, metal, you want a different type of metal tone, let's sort by most popular, apply. So you can see the most popular tone on the Tone Cloud for metal is of course a Metallica style tone. So you can click it to get it onto your amp. So this basically previews the tone. So now I should have a Metallica-ish sounding tone. Let's see how it sounds. That is still really hard to do to this day with only down picking. But yeah, it sounds pretty cool. Okay, so another big part of the Spark app is actually also the music section. This one I'm not gonna go into too much because it does rely on music theory, which I unfortunately am unknowledgeable on. So I don't personally really know how to make use of it that well. So I feel like I won't do the best job showing you guys how to use it, but I thought I would go over it really quickly to kind of give you the gist of what it can do. So you can basically make your own backing track by selecting like a different drummer. So we got Dave, who loves rock and pop. So you can click start, make a backing track at 120 BPM, start. And then in theory, if you're playing through the amp, it would basically analyze what chords you're playing and generate a backing track based on that with drums and bass. Pretty cool stuff. In addition to that, there's a whole section where there's basically tabbed songs where you can kind of listen to, watch, and play along with tabs of songs that are already recorded. And you can see, obviously, there's essentially a YouTube video that's superimposed on the screen along with a chord chart on the bottom. Pretty cool stuff as well. But again, since I don't really know what the chords mean, I can't really show you guys, but I thought I would just show you on the screen what it looks like just in case this interests you as well. You can also actually feed your own music into it. So you can see on my profile page, I imported my Doom Spotify playlist, which basically has some of my Doom covers in it. And basically you can go ahead and play one of my own songs and it'll analyze it for me. And it'll basically tell me what I'm doing, even if I don't know what I'm doing. Pretty cool stuff. So now that I've shown you guys how this amp sounds, as well as pretty much all of the specs and things you can do with it, minus the whole music theory thing, which is my bad, what do I actually think about it? This is the last thing to talk about here. So first and foremost, I was actually more happy with how it sounded than I thought I was going to be. This amp is pretty cheap. It's only around $250 USD, give or take, depending on if there's a sale or not. And I don't know, for that price, I wasn't expecting anything amazing sounding because, you know, that's on the lower end of things. But I mean, I was overall pretty impressed with it. I felt like I got a pretty usable tone pretty easily. I actually really like the app. I think it's really intuitive and easy to use. The only thing that I couldn't figure out at first was that double tapping each object actually gave you a list of other options. That was the only thing that I didn't know how to do at first, but once I figured that out, easy. And for me personally, like I said, since the whole music theory and chord analysis thing doesn't really apply to me, I think the coolest thing is the tone cloud. I know that this isn't something that's necessarily exclusive to Positive Grid, but the way that they've implemented it in the app and it via Bluetooth just directly goes to the amp and it's on instantly is really cool. There are so many tones that are available on there, and of course you can upload your own, trade with friends and stuff like that. You can even find my tone on there if you look for it. I think if you search like #Bana, it should be there. Basically what I did was I just took someone else's tone that already was on there and I just edited it to my liking and then re-uploaded it as something different, because that's what people do, right? You find a preset, you play with it, you get it sounding how you like, and you're good to go. So that whole part of things was really easy. It's also nice that you can actually save a tone cloud preset to the physical hardware. So if you don't want to connect your amp, again, I could just click the first button of the presets on the top of the amp and I know that it's going to be the preset that I want. That's really nice, is that you don't have to have the app open at all times. Pretty handy. As for the things I don't like, these are, again, as usual, I like to try and find some things that I think could be better. It's nothing serious this time around, there's just a few things. Number one is I wish that there was a tuner that actually showed you what note you're tuning to. So with the press and hold tuner on the top, basically it just gives you an LED indicator of if you're in tune or not, but it doesn't actually tell you like what note you're playing or anything like that. So you kind of have to assume that your guitar is already in the tuning or close to the tuning you want in the first place in order to use that. So that was a little bit of a, you know, something that I think could be improved, whether they just like throw in a tuner on the app or something like that. I think that would be really useful. The second thing, this is maybe a personal preference, but I kind of wish that all of the controls were actually on the front of the amp. I know that they would have had to raise it a little bit vertically to fit the control panel on the front. But I just personally find that a little easier than like going over top of it, especially for something that's formatted as like a desktop amp, like assuming it's gonna be on your desktop. To me, if I'm sitting at it looking eye level, it's much easier to twist something here than to like stand up and look over it. But I guess that's just me. If you have it like on the ground or on a table or something, probably not a big deal. So just personal preference for me. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is if you are using the chord analysis feature or the tab feature, definitely make sure you plug in an actual aux cable and don't use Bluetooth for that, because this isn't anything to do with the amp. This is just Bluetooth in general. Bluetooth is not very reliable and it is kind of laggy. So if you're trying to play something in real time by watching the video or the chord analysis that's happening on the screen, I did find Bluetooth lagged a little bit, which was kind of annoying, but if you just plug it in through the aux cable, that solves that issue, so no big deal. It's actually really nice that it does have Bluetooth though, because I can totally envision bringing this somewhere as a portable Bluetooth speaker, because it's very, very loud. As you guys heard in this video, I think I had the output at like 3 out of 10, and my fiance is in the bedroom over there and she was still telling me to turn it down, so this thing can get very, very loud. But yeah, that's pretty much all my thoughts on this. So that's all I got to say about this video. If you're interested in getting your own Spark by Positive Grid, you can find a link in the description or the pinned comment. At the time of posting this video, they also have a sale on, so if you want to take advantage of that, go check it out right now. I'm pretty sure the sale ends today. So if you want to impulse buy a new amp, now would be a good time. But that's pretty much all I have to say. Of course, a big thank you to Positive Grid for sending this amp over to me. And again, go check out their website. It's gonna be linked in the description below. Last but not least, a huge thank you to all my Patreon members whose names are on the screen at this point in time. If you guys are ever interested in getting audio downloads, guitar tabs, stems, or a shout out on the screen, you can find the options for all of that over on my Patreon page. That's all I got to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.